In one town on this list, a man was murdered and his killers went to extraordinary lengths to make sure he would never be found. A case so shocking it's still discussed by locals today. In another, a police and crime commissioner has admitted on the record that his own officers are working with one hand tied behind their backs. And the town at number 1 carries a crime rate so high that only 2 places in the entire country rank worse, and both of them are boroughs of London. This is 12 UK towns where the police data, the court records, and the government's own statistics all point to the same conclusion. Stay with me until the end, because the town at number 1 is not a close call. We're going through this countdown using verified crime figures from police.uk and the Office for National Statistics, official government deprivation data, and real court cases that were reported by the BBC, the Crown Prosecution Service, and local newsrooms across the country. Nothing here is rumor and nothing is exaggerated for effect. These are real convictions, real sentences, and real numbers. Some of these towns lost the industry that built them. Some are seaside resorts that never got their tourists back. All of them are still home to people living ordinary lives inside some genuinely extraordinary statistics, going to work, raising families, and hoping the next set of figures looks a little better than the last. Let's start at number 12. Number 12 is Luton, in Bedfordshire, a town that grew up around the car industry and never fully recaptured its footing after that industry collapsed. Luton's crime rate sits just under 98 incidents per 1,000 residents, well above the national average, and vehicle crime alone spiked by over 60% in one recent year. But the case that still gets talked about in Luton is the killing of 38-year-old Omar Khan, who lost his life in an attack in the Southend-on-Sea Park area in September of 2023. 2 teenage drug dealers were convicted of his murder at Guildford Crown Court, and the court heard that the younger of the two, just 17 at the time, had spent months arming himself before that night. The weapon he used has never been recovered. Khan's partner survived the same attack with serious injuries. The younger of the 2 killers received a 20-year minimum sentence. It's the kind of case that makes a statistic like 60% feel a lot less abstract. That takes us to number 11, Weston-super-Mare on the North Somerset coast. Quick pause before we keep going. If you're new here, subscribe now because 11 more towns are still ahead, and tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. Weston-super-Mare was once a grand Victorian seaside resort, and today it holds the highest crime rate of any major town in Somerset, over 50% above the county average. But the case that haunts this town predates almost everything else on this list. On the 28th of March 1987, 66-year-old Helen Fleet was walking her 2 dogs through the woods at Whurlberry Hill when she was attacked and killed. Her killer has never been identified. Nearly 4 decades later, the case remains formally unsolved. One of the coldest open murder files on the entire Somerset coast, and it sits there as a quiet undercurrent beneath a town that today posts crime numbers well above where they should be for a place its size. Number 10 is Southend-on-Sea in Essex, home to the longest pleasure pier in the world and, according to police-recorded data, the highest crime rate of any town in the county. Southend's numbers climb every single summer, peaking in July as day trippers flood in, then dropping back down through the winter months. In one recent case, a 19-year-old woman suffered life-changing injuries in an attack at a residential block right next to Southend United's football ground. An incident serious enough that 7 separate people were eventually arrested in connection with it, on suspicion ranging from attempted murder to conspiracy to murder. In a separate, unrelated incident the same year, a 21-year-old man was charged with 2 counts of attempted murder after an attack inside a residential address just streets away. Violent crime now accounts for more than 40% of everything recorded in Southend in a typical 12-month period. This is a seaside town that's supposed to feel safest in summer, and the data says the opposite is true. Southend was granted city status only a few years ago, a formal royal honor meant to mark a new chapter for the town, and officials have leaned hard into that new identity, pointing to the pier, the seafront, and a wave of investment as proof the city is moving forward. The crime figures tell a more complicated version of that same story, one where the postcard and the police report don't quite agree with each other. Number 9 is Hastings, on the East Sussex coast, a town that carved its name into English history nearly 1,000 years ago, and in 2025 carved it into a very different kind of record. That year, the UK government released its official 5 yearly indices of deprivation, and for the first time, parts of Hastings appeared among England's newly identified most deprived neighborhoods. This isn't a private company's estimate. This is the British government's own measurement of income, unemployment, health, and crime, published only once every 5 years. And Hastings landing on that list means something has measurably deteriorated here. A hollowed-out seafront and a shortage of stable work have been building pressure on this town for years, and in 2025, the numbers finally caught up with it. Hastings joined a small group of neighborhoods newly flagged in that report, places the data suggests are actively sliding rather than leveling off, which is a very different and more troubling signal than simply staying near the bottom of the table report after report. A government minister described the broader findings that year as a damning indictment of communities left behind by years of strain on local services. And Hastings, a town most people associate with a battle fought nearly a millennium ago, is now also associated with a very modern kind of decline. Number 8 takes us into Lincolnshire, to Scunthorpe, a town built almost entirely around a single steelworks that once employed thousands. As that industry contracted, so did Scunthorpe's prospects, and today, independent crime risk analysis built from official police data ranks Scunthorpe as the second most dangerous location anywhere in the county. That ranking isn't based on raw crime counts, it's weighted by the severity of each offense. Which means Scunthorpe isn't just recording a lot of crime, it's recording crime that skews toward the more serious end of the scale. Local coverage of the town regularly features cable theft severe enough to cut power to entire streets, vandalism forcing companies to send staff home from damaged offices, and a steady churn of cases through the local courts. It's the portrait of a town where infrastructure keeps taking hits faster than anyone can repair them. In one recent incident, 2 waste-filled trailers were dumped and abandoned on the outskirts of town, and a council official publicly called the act breathtakingly irresponsible. Environmental crime committed in plain sight. It's a small story, but it captures something about Scunthorpe right now. A town where even the crimes that don't make national headlines are becoming harder and harder for the people who live there to simply shrug off. And that brings us to the one town in the entire county that ranks even worse. Number 7 is Skegness, the classic English seaside holiday town. The kind of place generations of families associate with donkey rides and fish and chips on the beach. According to the same severity-weighted crime risk data, Skegness sits at the very top of Lincolnshire's rankings, ahead of Scunthorpe, ahead of Grimsby, ahead of every other town in the county. It's a strange contradiction to sit with. A place built entirely on the postcard image of a happy English holiday carrying the heaviest crime risk score anywhere in its region. Part of the explanation lies in how dramatically the town's population swings between seasons. Skegness balloons with visitors every summer and then contracts sharply once the arcades close for winter, leaving a smaller, older, permanent population behind to deal with whatever the tourist season left in its wake. From strained local services to a housing stock that was never really built for year-round living in the first place. We're now halfway through this list. If these stories are landing with you, hit subscribe, because the next 6 towns get considerably heavier. Starting with one where 2 young men lost their lives outside a bar in the middle of a Saturday night. Number 6 is Doncaster in South Yorkshire, a town that lost its economic backbone when the coal industry collapsed through the 80s and 90s. Doncaster's crime rate today sits at roughly 138 incidents per 1,000 residents, consistently among the higher figures in Yorkshire. On the 29th of January 2022, a fight broke out outside a bar on Silver Street in the town centre. 19-year-old Amrit Jagra was captured on CCTV pursuing 2 other young men, and within moments both had been fatally injured. 20-year-old Ryan Theobald died at the scene. 17-year-old Yanis Kozlovskis died in hospital a short time later. Jagra went on the run before handing himself in days later, and claimed self-defense throughout a 10-day trial. The jury didn't believe him. He was convicted of murder at Sheffield Crown Court. 2 young men, gone within minutes of each other on a Saturday night on a town center street where people were simply out for the evening. Kozlovskis' sister told the court her brother's life was taken from him in a matter of seconds, just as he was coming into adulthood. That's the kind of case that shapes how a whole community remembers a single night. And it's a reminder that Doncaster's numbers aren't confined to former mining estates on the edge of town, they show up in the middle of the town center too. On an ordinary Saturday, outside an ordinary bar. Number 5 is Grimsby, in northeast Lincolnshire, once the largest fishing port in the world. As that industry shrank, official crime risk analysis has identified Grimsby as the single most dangerous major town anywhere in Lincolnshire, with a rate that's been recorded as high as 159 incidents per 1,000 residents. But the case that shocked this town happened over a decade ago, and people here still bring it up. In 2011, 33-year-old Adam Vincent was murdered at a house in the Scunthorpe area of Grimsby. His killers, a father and his 2 adult sons, along with a 4th man, then went to disturbing lengths to conceal what they had done, in a deliberate, calculated attempt to make sure Adam would never be found. It didn't work. Evidence recovered days after he had already been reported missing helped lead investigators to the truth. All 3 members of the Griffiths family were convicted of murder at Sheffield Crown Court and sentenced to life. Years later, one of the men involved in concealing the crime wrote to Adam's father from prison, asking for forgiveness. His father has said the request came far too easily for what was done to his son. That same man has since been released from prison, and reports suggest he has made visits back to Grimsby as part of his rehabilitation, a detail that has reopened old wounds for a family that never fully closed the book on 2011. Grimsby's crime figures today: drug offenses up over 70% in a single year. Criminal damage running nearly 180% above the national average sit on top of a town that already carries the memory of one of its darkest cases in living history. Number 4 is different from everything else on this list because it isn't ranked by crime statistics at all. Jaywick, a small coastal community near Clacton-on-Sea in Essex, has been named the single most deprived neighborhood in the entire country by the UK government's official indices of deprivation, not once, not twice, but 4 separate times, in 2010, 2015, 2019, and again in 2025. 4 consecutive reports spanning 15 years and 6 different prime ministers, and Jaywick has never once lost that title. The village began as a 1930s holiday camp of small wooden bungalows, structures that were never designed for year-round living, and decades later, people still live in many of those same buildings full-time. A United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty specifically traveled here as part of an official fact-finding mission into the UK, using Jaywick as a case study in how deprivation becomes permanent. The local council has now committed over £100 million toward a 20-year plan just to start turning things around, which tells you how deep this runs. We're now solidly past the halfway mark, and the next 3 entries are where this list stops being about numbers and starts being genuinely hard to forget. If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time, because towns 3, 2, and 1 are the reason this video exists. Number 3 is Hartlepool, on the County Durham coast, a town that lost the shipbuilding and steel industries that once defined it. Hartlepool's crime rate sits at 141 incidents per 1,000 residents, the second highest figure anywhere within the Cleveland police force area, which itself records the highest overall crime rate of any police force in England and Wales. But the case that put Hartlepool in national headlines had nothing to do with ordinary crime statistics. In October of 2023, a man named Ahmed Alid attacked and seriously injured a man he shared a house with on Wharton Terrace. His housemate managed to fight him off. Alid then left the property, walked toward the town center, and attacked a complete stranger, 65-year-old Terence Carney, taking his life in the street. He was convicted of murder and attempted murder at Teesside Crown Court, and received a life sentence with a minimum term of 45 years. One of the longest minimum terms handed down anywhere in the country that year. The case shook Hartlepool precisely because both attacks happened within the same hour, against people who had no connection to whatever drove Alid to violence that night. Number 2 is Blackpool, in Lancashire, the town that basically invented the idea of the classic British seaside holiday, complete with its tower, its illuminations, and a pleasure beach that once welcomed millions of visitors a year. Today, Lancashire County Council's own official district profile confirms Blackpool recorded the highest overall crime rate of any district in the county in 2024, leading in burglary, robbery, vehicle crime, and violent crime all at once, along with the highest rate of antisocial behavior anywhere in Lancashire. But long before those numbers, Blackpool already had a case that locals still call one of the town's most disturbing. In the early hours of the 30th of December 1997, 17-year-old Christopher Hartley was murdered behind a hotel on Reeds Avenue, and his killer took deliberate, calculated steps to prevent him from ever being identified. Investigators confirmed what had happened within days, but the case has never been fully resolved in every respect, and to this day it remains one of the most disturbing in the town's history for exactly that reason. His killer, Stuart Diamond, was convicted at Preston Crown Court and told by the judge he was clearly a very dangerous young man. Diamond had reportedly told psychiatrists years earlier that he feared what he might be capable of, a warning sign that in hindsight, nobody acted on in time. He remains in prison to this day, still undergoing parole reviews more than 25 years later. Beyond the crime numbers, Blackpool has also been identified by the UK government as home to 8 of the 10 most deprived individual neighbourhoods anywhere in England, all clustered on the streets just behind the same promenade that appears on every postcard of the town. And that brings us to number 1, the town we opened this video with, Middlesbrough, on Teesside, a town that grew explosively around iron and steel in the 19th century, earning the nickname Ironopolis, before the collapse of that same industry left it absorbing the consequences for decades. Here are the numbers. Middlesbrough's crime rate sits at approximately 166 incidents per 1,000 residents, the third highest rate of any local authority area in the whole of England and Wales. Only two places record a higher rate, and both of them are London boroughs. Outside of London, nowhere in the country records more crime per resident than Middlesbrough. Between 2019 and 2025, its ranking for crime-linked deprivation jumped from 15th worst local authority in the country to second worst. And in February of 2025, this town produced a case that stunned even people used to reading Middlesbrough's crime reports. 3 men, led by 29-year-old Sidney Bashford, broke into the home of 28-year-old Jordan Hogg, a father of 1, and killed him in a planned attack over a stolen electric bike worth £3,500. A bike Hogg had nothing to do with taking. The court heard they had the wrong man entirely. All 3 attackers, along with their getaway driver and a teenage lookout, were convicted of murder and given life sentences of up to 28 years. Bashford fled to France in the aftermath and was eventually caught. Cleveland Police's own police and crime commissioner has said publicly that his officers are working with one hand tied behind their backs, carrying the budget of a small rural force while facing the crime levels of a major city. A local district commander has directly acknowledged that deprivation and unemployment are driving what this town now records. Roughly half of Middlesbrough's individual neighborhoods now rank among the most deprived 10% in the entire country. And the Hogg case wasn't an isolated flare-up either. In November of 2025, just months after Hogg's murder, a separate organized gang ambushed 2 men in a car in the North Ormsby area of town, part of a dispute over stolen drug money, leaving both victims seriously injured after an attack the court heard had been deliberately planned in advance. 2 serious, organized, premeditated attacks within the same town inside a single year, both ending in life sentences, both rooted in the same drug economy that officials say has filled the space left behind by Middlesbrough's vanished industry. Of everywhere on this list, Middlesbrough is the one place where the crime data, the deprivation rankings, and the words of the people actually running the town all point in exactly the same direction, and it's not a direction that's turning around anytime soon. 12 towns, 12 very different histories, and underneath almost all of them, the same quiet pattern. An industry that used to hold a place together, whether that was steel, coal, fishing, shipbuilding, or a tourist season that ended decades ago, disappeared. And the town has spent years since trying to figure out what comes next. None of these places are defined forever by a single number or a single case. People here are still working to turn things around. From Blackpool's long-term regeneration partnership to Jaywick's newly funded improvement plan to the community programs quietly operating in Middlesbrough's hardest-hit neighborhoods. But the data is the data, and the cases are real, sitting in court transcripts and police files whether we talk about them or not. What struck me putting this list together wasn't just the severity of any single case, it was how often the same few threads kept reappearing. A vanished industry, a stretched police budget, a young man with nothing left to lose. None of that excuses what happened in any of these towns. It just explains why the numbers look the way they do, and why the people still fighting to turn these places around have such a steep hill in front of them. If this deep dive into the darker side of British towns hit different, subscribe, drop a comment telling us which one surprised you most, and we'll see you in the next one.